probably even more apropos now, given the size of the audience. This is a conversation, not a presentation or a lecture, certainly not a sermon, right? We'll walk through the basic first steps, and we'll have a lot of time for Q&A, and we'll have more time towards the end for the same, and then we'll split up and we'll start to get to work. So, for those of you who don't remember or weren't around when I was here last day, my name is Jeff Sanders. I am I'm an urban planner, municipal planner. 2023 is my 30th year in this career. Time flies. And I had the privilege of working with this community on your previous outdoor recreation plan, and also on the Alpine Center Business Park transition to a town center. And I've been very much looking forward to starting this again. It's the drive-in here is, a lot of my drives go to southeast Wisconsin, no disrespect. Some of my best clients pay me quite well to drive down to southeast Wisconsin, but it's not the same driving on 41 or 43 south as it is driving here. So, again, please stop me at any time with any questions you have. I think my voice will probably carry. I was in a meeting last night that lasted much longer than it should have. So I drank lots of tea and honey this morning, knowing I'd be talking tonight again. So with that, let's just get going. So 6 items, if you will, on the pseudo agenda tonight. The introduction has already commenced. Outdoor recreation in Wisconsin, just a description of how it works at the state level. Oh my goodness, we have one more. We just started with the hi, how are you? So.
Oh good, I didn't miss anything.
Wisconsin has to do outdoor recreation plans as well, once every 5 years, just like the town of Rome does. We'll do a demographic update. Things have changed a little bit for some obvious reasons that we kind of alluded to briefly a moment ago. Things are always changing, as we know. We'll summarize the Park and Rec survey. I won't ask for a call of hands because I don't want anybody to be embarrassed, but I hope you all completed the survey. If you did, shame on you. Shame, you can, doors that way. Then we'll just have kind of an open-ended discussion about what comes next. Maybe any questions you have. We certainly have a couple drawings for the proposed pickleball court that we'll bring up. We'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll quickly summarize the next steps in the process, and then we'll bid each other adieu for this evening anyway. So, what is a CORP? So, Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan is, first of all, it's a 5-year plan. Your original plan was 2018, so tick, 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 and here we are. There's no state requirement to have an outdoor recreation plan, none whatsoever. You can say, that was fine, Jeff, but we're not going to do that again. That'd be fine. The only downside to that, well, I shouldn't say the only downside, but probably the most significant downside is without a CORP, no state grants, no federal grants, right? It's a prerequisite for sliding in, even to slide into the application submittal process. Without that box having a cute little check in it, you don't go to the next step. Unless the next step is the round file off to the left of the desk. It describes the community in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, outdoor recreation and indoor recreation and open space and pedestrian and bicycle facilities and all that kind of stuff. But also demographically, brief description of the community. What I did in... Stop that.
Now it came back.
What we did in 2018, and what I do with all outdoor recreation plans, is take most of that non-changing background information out of your comprehensive plan. So we haven't had a glacier in a while with what's happening around the United States. I wouldn't bet that it won't happen soon. But we haven't had a glacier in a while, so your topography hasn't changed, your geology hasn't changed. The changes that have occurred, although significant, are probably not earth-shattering in terms of the transportation network and housing and stuff like that. But that'll be built into this process as well. Inventory of existing facilities, desires for new facilities, all that kind of stuff. And again, the most important part is the last part. When this is done, it has to reflect what you as a community want in terms of outdoor recreation, not what some tall, scary-looking bald guy thinks is the right answer for this job. Because there's no right answer other than the one that is right for you. So, I mentioned earlier, state of Wisconsin. So, S-Corp is stop doing that. CORP is the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. Again, they have to do it every 5 years. The one that's in place right now was 2019 to 2022, 2023, I have to do the math. So they're actually in the process, they started about a year ago, they're in the process of developing the next outdoor recreation plan. It will not be completed before this one's completed, which is a bit unfortunate because I think we'll see more data specific to how COVID-19 changed outdoor recreation, more accurately perhaps, how it changed the desire for indoor recreation. I'll get to that when we get to some of the survey questions. But there have been noticeable changes. I've been doing this a while. The number of these plans, and the last 3 are functionally different than all the ones that came before it. 3 totally different communities, one very heavily urbanized community in southeastern Wisconsin, one very small village in northeastern Wisconsin, but this similarity crosses over some. What the survey found back in 2019 is 95% of state residents participate in outdoor recreation. That sounds like amazing, right? Well, walking outside counts too. So of that 95%, a very significant percentage is people who go for a walk on their own, take the dog for a walk, kind of light outdoor recreation that can occur regardless of where you live. Urban, rural, it's not me. But not the mental image we have when we say outdoor recreation, bicycle trails, golf courses, ATV facilities, not that kind of thing, right? The vast majority of that number is people are just going outside and enjoying outside because outside is enjoyable. Maybe tomorrow, not so much. Appleton is supposed to go 101, so hopefully it doesn't get quite that hot here. The numbers are pretty significant though. That 17.9 billion covers a whole bunch of stuff. It covers park stickers for state parks. It covers fuel from certain fuel stations associated with outdoor recreation facilities. It includes obviously all the kinds of fun stuff that, we have more. All the kinds of fun stuff that we buy to enjoy the things that we enjoy, and we spend way too much money doing so. For some it might be golf clubs, for me it's skis and kayaks and other ridiculously expensive things. But it's a big chunk of money, not surprising, Wisconsin's known for that outdoor recreation stuff. Back in 2019, statewide, the top 5 uses in terms of participation were walking and hiking, fishing, hunting, bicycling, and camping. That number has changed, and we'll know more from the state level when we see it, but those numbers all went up. The numbers that went down are indoor facilities and all manner of indoor facilities. But again, we'll get to that a little bit more. The most frequent activities outside are bird wildlife watching at home, hiking, walking, running on trails, picnicking, cookouts, visiting beaches, and swimming in lakes and rivers. 60% of Wisconsin residents rely on public lands and waters for recreation. That's important, right? Particularly in this state. For those of you who travel around the country a lot, particularly when you get west of the Mississippi, it's not like that so much. I mean, there's lots of federal land, but there's not the availability of parks the way there is in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. We do pretty well in that regard. Finally, that's CORP goals. Boost participation, grow partnerships. That's good, right? Because there's grant funding out there. But even the grant funding is more challenging if you're going after it alone. The more partners you have signing on to an application, the higher the probability that you're going to be selected to move forward to the next phase. And that's really what it's about. I mean, ideally you get the grant, but for people who write grants, our first goal is let's make sure it doesn't go into the trash can first. That's a small, modest goal, but it's an important one, because if you don't get that, you don't go farther. But anything you can do for partnerships, whether it be public-private, whether it be other municipalities, whether it be local organizations, religious institutions, school groups, diverse populations, all that kind of stuff. The more of those you can have, either being a partner on the grant application or just signing on in support of, it moves you up the ranking criteria. And that's what it is, right? There's somebody, a GS5 in Chicago or some equivalent in Madison, whose main job sitting at his or her desk is to take that monstrous stack of applications for this grant or that grant and winnow it down to the 10 or 12 or 15 that they're gonna pass on to their supervisor. Obviously, when you know you can only select some small number out of a large volume of applications, anything you can do to make that application stand out, colors, pictures, you know, things that just send a really happy message. Partnerships do that really, really well. Providing high quality experiences, improving data, so making sure that the community and your user base knows exactly what's there and how to make it available to them, and then enhancing funding and financial stability. So if you have a really, really nice park system, but you have no staff, if you have a beautiful aquatic park, but you can't find any lifeguards, I mean, this stuff is all really important, and it just hammers local budgets, as all of you probably know. And I apologize, that's gonna be a little bit hard to see, but in terms of the changing population in the state of Wisconsin from urban to rural, so the dark blue lines on the left are rural population, starting in 1900, projected through, stopping at 2010. I'm sorry, let me do that the other way around. The dark blue is urban population, the light blue is rural population. You can see the shift that starts to occur immediately, but becomes really, really apparent post-World War II. And that is a far lower percentage of Wisconsinites living in rural communities as opposed to urban communities. Now, the urban environment that DOA uses in this graph doesn't necessarily mean downtown Milwaukee or downtown Madison. It includes smaller cities, first-ring suburbs, second-ring suburbs. That generally meets the generic term of urban. Rome would absolutely positively qualify in the rural area. And again, that transition is not shocking. It's happening across the United States, and it's been happening for 80 years now. It's important to know, however, because although that's population shift, the highest valued outdoor recreation assets tend to be in the rural communities. So the home base may shift from rural to urban, but where you want to play, that stayed primarily in rural areas. In terms of Wisconsin's population, projected change by age, and that's 2010 in the dark blue, projected 2040 population in the light blue, and this is population by age group. So as you go from the columns left to right, 0 to 4, 5 to 24, 25 to 44, 45 to 64, 65 to 84, and finally 85 and over. And what you'll see is a high degree of stability until you get to age 65. And then the growth is significant. And that's not shocking, right? The United States is an aging country, not compared to Europe, not compared to Japan, not compared to China. Those countries are aging far more rapidly than we are, which is hurting them right now. And the town of Rome is an aging community. You'll see when we get to the numbers. It's changed significantly since 2000 in terms of the median age here. Why is that important? Well, if you know that the population is growing within one of these categories, you're probably going to shift your expenditures towards meeting that growth area more than a population that is stagnant, or even worse, declining. So lots and lots and lots of swing sets, maybe not so much in a community that doesn't see much growth in the underage 18 population, actually more like the underage 12 population, right? But it'll get more detailed when we get into the Rome demographics. In terms of the activity groups, 68% of the respondents to the survey that led to the CORP in 2019 identified hiking, walking, and running as their top. And I'm just going to go down I'll just read the list and the numbers right now. Boating-related activities, that included everything: motors, paddling, fishing, not fishing. Nature observation 66%, boating 61%, fishing 49%, camping 41%, dog-related activities 38%, bicycling 35%, hunting 27%, and motorized trail-based activities, ATVs, UTVs, and such 25%. Now, those of you in this community already looking at those numbers can say, well, no, that doesn't reflect here, right? Your ATV usage is slightly higher than 25%. And there are some other things that are different as well. Obviously, fishing in a community like this, when you have the assets that you have, is going to be much, much higher than the statewide average. That said, there's a lot of really good places to fish and a lot of really good places to ride ATVs in the state of Wisconsin. But your geographic location, the natural setting, lends itself to a whole bunch of outdoor fun. And again, everybody in this room knows that far better than I. The priorities for the current S-Corp are focus on natural resources and habitat, provide more places near urban centers to support nature-based recreation. And it's important, right, because when you're going after grant funding, when you're going after specific grants, you want to tailor your application to meet these big picture goals and direction areas. So whether it's under the S-Corp or whether it's under Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is the primary source for much of the grant funding in Wisconsin for outdoor recreation, knowing what they want, take that back. Presenting what you want in a way that makes them think it's exactly what they want is going to help you more than saying, well, we want this and we don't care what you think you want, this is what we want. Yeah, that doesn't get you, that gets you about to step 2 or step 3, and then you go into the on-filing calendar. And again, by all means, jump in at any time with any questions or comments you may have. Increasing access, shore access for fishing, boating, and swimming. Supporting local recreation efforts. It's kind of low on the list, but that's an important one, right? In terms of the S-Corp region, in the town of Rome, we're right kind of in the middle, right? The Western Sands area. So the rest of the data that you're going to see is primarily associated with the Western Sands survey responses. I should have mentioned the S-Corp survey, when it goes out, goes to all county level departments, generally county planning agencies. And then they do with that survey whatever they do. Some counties do it internally, they just have staff fill it out. Some go to great extents to involve the public in the survey responses. And like every other standard deviation, there's a whole bunch in the middle. But it's county based. So all the counties within the Western Sands, the response has led to what you're going to see coming up for the Western Sands region. So in terms of trends, there were strong increases. Again, you'll hear me say this and I'll belabor it, probably belaborously. 2019 to 2023. We're not positive how much of this is going to be, how much of it will carry over. I can project, I can extrapolate, but in the end we're not certain until we see the stuff. So bicycling in winter and fat tire biking, those are big increases back then. Camping, RV, and pop-up, so a little bit more structured camping as opposed to throwing a 2.5-ounce North Face tent in a backpack and walking off into the wilderness. Bicycling on mountain bikes, ATVs, UTVs. Sorry, I went too quick there. Moderate increases in canoeing and kayaking and other paddling activities. Bicycling on recreation trails, rail to trails, mostly urbanized trails when you think about rails to trails, but there are some here, there are rural areas in the state as well. Picnicking, day use, and going to the beach. Hiking, walking, and running on trails. Paddleboarding. All these pictures were taken in Rome, by the way, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of stuff online. It's another thing that's changed, right? Back in the good old days, we had to go out to the community and spend 3 or 4 hours going through a lot of film. And to get to those communities, we had to gazette ear, and you'd highlight the map, and if it was at night, you had to stop and try to figure out where you are. Technology, right? Dog walking on trails, hiking, walking, and running on trails. And then target firearm shooting at designated ranges, as opposed to, just in your backyard. Slight increases in fishing, motorboating, snowshoeing. All these, by the way, I'll bet you all $1, each one of you, mind you. I'll bet each one of you $1 that those numbers go up in the next S-Corp, because everybody was trying to get out of the house for a couple of years. Cross-country skiing on groomed trails, driving 4-wheel drive vehicles, horseback riding. Stable, target archery, bird and wildlife watching, nature photography, swimming in lakes, ponds, and rivers, which is so much more fun than swimming in pools, if you ask me. Gathering berries, mushrooms, etc. Hunting turkey, hunting small game, hunting migratory birds, hunting big game. Could just say hunting, I suppose. What have we missed? Hunting dinosaurs felt a lot. cross-country skiing on groomed trails, and trapping. So again, that's stable, no significant change up, no significant change down. Slight decrease, camping and tents. I'll bet you another dollar, each one of you mind you, that number goes up in the 2023. Riding dual sports motorcycles, I bet that stays about where it was. Obviously, localized changes apply. Snowmobiling, moderate decrease, not surprising there, I think we know that. If you spend any time up in the Northwoods, you know it's not what it used to be, and if you spend any time anywhere else in the state, you know it's really not what it used to be. The needs in the Western Sand region, again, when this presents needs, it's based upon the survey results, not on some elitist snob from Madison saying, this is what I think they need. So, bicycling, touring and off-road, touring and off-road, bird and wildlife watching, camping, canoeing and kayaking, dog walking, fishing and hunting, hiking, walking, trail running and backpacking, horseback riding, picnicking, snowshoeing, swimming in lakes and rivers again. So again, those are the needs that the state found in the response to from all the counties within the Western Sands. In terms of land and water conservation fund priorities, so the vast majority of funding for outdoor recreation in the United States comes from the federal government, but it goes through the state governments. In Wisconsin, that's typically the DNR. There are some exceptions, WSDOT and some others. And then the means by which it's distributed is generally through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So these are the top on the list. Meeting the needs of urban areas, obviously, we would have to have a very creatively presented and written grant application to get a check in that box in the town of Rome. So you play to the strengths, right? And you certainly play to the strengths of the applications. The grant programs. There are some grant opportunities out there that you're not going to get unless you have a whole bunch of undeveloped open space. Conversely, you have a chance at the ones that require increased parks for urbanized neighborhoods. I suppose we could try to make an argument here, which we would, but I wouldn't want to hold our breath on that. Provide opportunities that serve diverse populations. So diverse populations is locally specific, right? Diversity in one community as opposed to diversity in another community. It's an issue right now. I'm not going to get into that part of it, but diversity can mean cultural, it can mean racial, it can mean ethnic. Those are the ones that I think come to mind. It can mean socioeconomic, it can mean gender, it can mean age, it can mean all different kinds of stuff. The most important part for the town of Rome is, what does diversity mean here? What populations in this community are underserved by outdoor recreation? And maybe because you have such an abundance of outdoor recreation opportunities and facilities in this community that it's going to be difficult to make that argument. That aside, that's what you want to do. If we're looking at a population of, let's say, 19 and under that's not looking at significant growth over the next 20 years, that doesn't mean that there isn't a need for additional outdoor recreation facilities for that population group. So again, you just have to tailor the application to make it clear to that person sitting at a desk in Chicago, Madison, or elsewhere, that, oh yeah, this does meet our, great, plus has pretty pictures, and move it up on the top of the list. Develop facilities in areas with limited outdoor recreation opportunities. Again, bit of a challenge for the town of Rome there. Provide multi-use facilities. Meet outdoor recreation needs identified by local communities. That's easy, right? In this community, we have an abundance, but we don't have any of this. That's the argument you want to make, right? We have no pickleball courts, or we have 2 pickleball. We need 20 pickleball, whatever the case may be. Eligible projects are projects providing opportunities for public outdoor recreation. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that an eligible project for an outdoor recreation plan would be finding opportunities for outdoor recreation. That's one of those Department of Redundancy departments. Property with frontage on rivers, streams, lakes, providing water-based outdoor recreation. A little bit more here. I mean, you have lots of rivers, lots of lakes. Providing adequate public access to those places can be challenging, right? Because there's so much. I grew up in Shawano, and anybody who's familiar with Shawano Lake, there's the first ring cabins, and the second ring cabins, and the third ring cabins. It's like a microcosm of an urban community, except you're 2 rings back. So yeah, we have a cabin on Shauna Lake, except we have to walk through this cabin and this cabin to get to the water. Hopefully it's not that strong on Arrowhead, Camelot, and other places here, but still making sure there's access to open space, specifically a water-based open space is an important priority. Special recreation opportunities in areas such as floodplains, wetlands, and areas adjacent to scenic highways. So that's mainly, if you have these special places, the kinds of outdoor recreation facilities you'd be looking for that would be eligible for funding would be more passive oriented, more nature oriented, more not structurally oriented. So bird watching, fishing, hunting, trapping, cross-country skiing, passive trails, no disrespect, but not ATVs, not mountain bikes, not that kind of stuff, for floodplains, wetlands, and areas. In the winter, a little bit different because everything freezes and the ground's a little bit more tolerant of machinery. Natural areas and outstanding scenic areas for public access kind of builds into that other one we talked about a moment ago. Development within urban areas, again, not really applicable here. Property with frontage on river. Hold on here. Did I do a duplicate slide? No, it just looks like a duplicate slide. See, I blame the state for that. I should have caught that anyway. Property with frontage on river, streams, lakes, providing water-based outdoor recreation, nature-based recreation trails. That's always a huge one. As you know from the current outdoor recreation plan, it was high up on the request. We did the visual preference survey, all those really beautiful pictures, and pretty much every picture that had a trail in it, any kind of trail, was 90%, 86%. I mean, they're really, really high. And that's the case almost everywhere. Basic outdoor recreation facilities means, is there someplace in the community where tomorrow I could get up and go there, throw some charcoal on the grill, sit down and have a picnic? Is there someplace where I can go in the community because, it's supposed to be beautiful tomorrow night, the Perseids will be out, let's go put our tent up. Those are basic outdoor recreation facilities. They tend to be low infrastructure, fortunately also low cost in terms of the facility itself, but just serve a rudimentary need. And then the obvious one are the pedestrian and bicycle trails that we've talked about before. Renovating existing facilities, that's a big one too, and that was really underserved and underrepresented in previous state plans. That's an important one, right? Before you start spending money on new stuff, make sure you bring your old stuff up to par. Also, and you may know it more than most communities because Rome has been quite successful in securing grant funding for some of the things you wanted to do, you have to be ADA compliant to get most of that stuff. And many of the grant organizations will look at what you're proposing to make sure that's ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, I apologize, just making sure it's accessible. But they will also then look at all your other facilities that have nothing to do with what you're requesting in terms of grant funding and say, yeah, no. Tell you what, when you fix those problems over there and people have access to it, you have a beautiful outdoor hiking place, but there's no place to do what nature requires when nature requires it. That's a problem, right? It's a problem that tends to be more on the low end of the age population, age range, and on the high end, right? I mean, I remember when my daughter was younger, you couldn't post diaper, but ability to hold it. All right, go behind the tree, I won't look, that kind of stuff. So anyways, making sure you have existing facilities that meet the needs of the community so that the community can access those facilities. Sidebar, you're gonna see some otters. So even when I did the visual preference survey for Rome 5 years ago when my daughter was 5, whenever I do an outdoor recreation plan now, she always asks, when's the next outdoor recreation plan? Because she gets to do something every time. I don't let her do it with zoning ordinances because I don't want to go to jail. I don't let her do it with with comprehensive plans because they're just too comprehensive. But when it's an outdoor recreation plan, Kate gets to jump in. So in the visual preference survey that we did back in 2018, there was a community garden, and that was the Seymour Park Community Garden that my wife started, that my daughter worked in from the moment she was old enough to crawl. So she put that in a couple other slides. So, and then the ones I've done over the past, she's always, this time, she said, I want otters in it. And the reason is, it's my favorite animal. When I was a kid, see, this is why you come, right? You don't come for any of this stuff, you come to hear stuff. My grandfather had land not far from Shawano, farmland. And I grew up on the farm, and it was right next to someplace called Hayman's Falls, which doesn't mean much here, but if you've ever been in that part of the state, it's a really beautiful place. And the place where we would hunt was right on Hayman's Falls. But I was a kid, and I knew that there were otters down there. So while everybody else was hunting and I was supposed to be hunting, I would walk down there and I'd plop my butt in the snow, and I'd sit there and watch and just watch them have fun. So anyways, my daughter said, this one has to have otters in it. So wherever you see otters, that was Kate. She picked out the pictures, don't blame me. But anyways, that's why there's otters. So regarding the outdoor recreation plan and kind of just introduction of this process, any thoughts or comments or questions? Again, you don't have to wait until there's a slide that says questions. You can jump in any time. But before we move on to the demographics, which is next, just want to give you an opportunity to jump in. Yes, sir.
Jeff, when would you anticipate the CORP being redone? I know it's 2023, but possibly early '24?
I would say possibly I could live with. Probably not probably.
Probably middle of the year?
I would think it would be you know, I'm gonna say this and it'll be available tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
The draft is out there, but it's not publicly available. And I think it's been out for about a month and a half, 2 months. I might, maybe a little bit longer than that. If I recall last time, it was a 4-month or a 6-month period where it was out there in the counties, the regional planning commissions, various stakeholder groups, including things like snowmobile clubs and such. So it may exist somewhere in this community, but when the state sends it out, they tend to say, don't tell anybody about this. It's a draft. It's for your eyes only. Look it over, provide feedback. So if I had to put my chip on a square, I would say September 2024. Could be really early. Any other questions? Should we just keep going? Demographics. So this community is changing. Hopefully all communities change a little bit in good ways, not in bad ways, right? That's the challenge. Whatever the change is, you want it to be positive, and you don't want that change to affect the core or the culture of the community, unless of course the core of the culture of the community is awful, then you want to change it. So if you have an awful culture in Rome, let's change it. I suspect that's not the case, so gradual improvements around the edges and all that kind of stuff. In terms of population, this community has grown and is projected to continue to grow, but that growth is going to slow down. And that's true for the vast majority of communities in the United States right now, in terms of numbers, particularly rural communities. So I'll read the numbers to you because it's a little bit hard to see it from there. So the far left side, it's 368. That was your population in 1970. Your 2010 population was 2720, kind of right in the middle where you see that little plateau. And then your 2030 and 2040 projected populations are actually the same, 3,285. For what it's worth, the 2035 population is about 100 people more. So there's going to be a 10-year period where you get 100 people more, and then they all leave. They say, you know, we made a mistake, we're leaving, you go back to where you were in 2030. So again, the nice thing about that kind of growth is not this kind of growth. This kind of growth is challenging. It looks good. You go, ooh, we're growing, but there are challenges that come with that. The other one, there are challenges too. Mainly, you know, we still have enough roads for 10,000 people, but we have 45 residents now. Boy, are their taxes going to go up, right? Or the roads just fall apart. But when you get to this stage where it's relatively predictable, relatively stable growth, you can look back 5 years and use that as the data, use those numbers to project where you're going to be 5 years from now. There are always exceptions, right? 2007, Lehman, Bear Stearns, housing market. 2019, everybody knows what happened in 2019. There are always going to be those kinds of things that happen. But generally, they don't significantly change the trajectory of a community's population. Rural communities are declining. Communities like Rome, less so, because the obvious reason, right? This is a very, very highly desired community for tourists. Significant percentage of the properties in this community are owned by non-year-round residents. That actually breeds stability, because you're not gonna lose all those taxes because people are moving away from their second homes. Generally doesn't work that way. Really bad economic times notwithstanding. Talked earlier about the population groups, right? So my numbers are a little bit different. S-Corp uses a different data, State of Wisconsin uses a different data set. I usually use census data. So the age groups starting from the left to the right are under 5, 5 to 19, 20 to 20, and I'll explain why these numbers, by the way. 20 to 24, 25 to 44, 45 to 64, 65 to 84, and 85 and older. Why those groups? Well, under 5, and forgive me, those of you who were here 5 years ago when I was saying this may remember. Under 5, you're talking about people who are utterly dependent upon somebody else to exist. Food, shelter, healthcare, everything, right? You don't have a lot of, emancipated 3-year-olds running around. I know there's an emancipated 10-year-old running around right now someplace in Appleton. 5 to 19, probably the biggest change of all those groups occurs within this, right? So you think of a 5-year-old, well, all right, kindergarten, probably their first bike without training wheels, or very close to their first bike without training wheels. So now it's not just walking around the yard and maybe walking into the neighbor's yard, but it's biking down the street or biking around the block or biking wherever. So slightly more independence, right? As you go from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, et cetera, the level of independence, the level of mobility continues to rise. A bigger bike, more gears, more freedom if they're responsible, less so if they're not. And you keep moving there. Then when you get into teens, whole different situation. Obviously, when we get to 16, there's something that happens that expands mobility greatly. When you get to 18, whole different thing. And 19 is the cutoff because that's how the Census Bureau breaks down the age groups. They stop at 19. So, big changes in that group, but still mostly dependent upon somebody else for everything. Cooking, cleaning, all that kind of stuff. At the later end, in the high teens, stepping foot out the door, first job, a little bit more independence, but still these people are tied to their home. When you get to 20 to 24, generally out of high school, could be in a career, could be in college, could be in the military, could be in some other form of service, but still a little bit connected to home. Even if people are married at this age, the relationship with home is still there, even if it's just to drop off the laundry once a week. Mom, please, right? When you get to 25 to 44, now people who may be out of the military now, maybe got their degree, or are now 5 years into whatever their job is, whatever their career is. Housing changes, right? Now maybe first apartment, or if they were fortunate and they're in a career that pays well, they might be looking at buying their first home. Not in 2023 so easily, but hopefully not too distant future. But again, pretty significant change there too, because by the time you go through the 30s into the 40s, you're talking about, from a family standpoint, for those people who are having families, kids getting older, bigger house, more time in the job. Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, you kind of start to know what you're doing. 30 years later, I'm still trying to figure out some of this stuff. When you get into 45 to 64, historically, wrongly, but historically, people might call that group empty nesters or something like that, right? Kids, if you've had kids, might be out unless, you came home when you're 50 and your wife says, I have to tell you something. It's like, no, really? So yeah, 60-year-old father of a 10-year-old. When you get up to 65 to 84, today is nothing like that was 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? I mean, 80-year-olds are much healthier, much more active. Many are still working in some capacity. Population is growing. And then finally 85 and older. So 85 and older, things start slowing down in all the ways that they can start slowing down. Less so perhaps than historically. So within those age groups, you remember what I showed you at the state level, right? It was kind of stability, 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 stability. Huge growth in 65 and older, huge growth in 85 and older. A little bit different here, right? So you look to the columns on the left, you have population declines in the 19 and younger. Again, not shocking given rural community, housing values are, and land values are a bit up there because it's so desirable for people who live somewhere else and want to vacation here. When you get into the middle areas, again, still declines, you don't have that stability that you had before. So basically, until you get to age 65 in the age 65 category, general declines general declines seen over the last 20 years. Declines in population, not declines in quality of life or happiness or hopefully any of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, 65 to 84, it's like, whoa, all right, nearly doubled and nearly quadrupled. Again, small data set on the right. You know, we quintupled our population from 1 to, right? But still, that's important to know. So when you're prioritizing outdoor recreation funding with limited funds, you're going to look at the demographics and say, okay, you know, we have a choice between one of these things or one of those things. Who does this thing serve? Who does that thing serve? Maybe this one is one small group, but it's really important and is a high need. Pickleball courts, for instance. Trails, on the other hand, fills checks in almost all the groups, right? Young people want them, older people want them, everybody in between wants them. So something to consider as you move forward. And again, by all means, I get tired of listening to my own voice, so please, if you have any questions, jump in. In terms of general demographics, from 2000 to 2020, a pretty significant increase in housing units, right? I'm not sure what percentage of those housing units are year-round occupied for vacation. You can break that out, but I would have had to charge you a little bit more money to figure that out. That's something that's probably available from the county and probably available from East Central to a little bit more of a degree. And then you probably know more here because the building permits that you're issuing for new home starts probably tell you who's going to be living in them, right? If it's 3,500 square feet, lakefront property, you know, that's not going to be someone who's 30 looking for probably not going to be somebody who's 30 looking for their first home for their growing family. Median age. So I don't say this for any other reason than it's a factual statement. That's the highest increase I've seen in 20 years in any community I've worked in my career. So that's something to keep in mind. This community, like all communities, is aging. It's an older community with each year passing. It's happening a little bit quicker here. Probably COVID-19 related to a degree, not all of it. Almost certainly the year-round stuff, right? Because again, you're looking at, I don't remember what the number is, Jamie, was it like 60% or 65% of the dwelling units in this community or the property in this community was owned by non-year-round residents?
We pre-COVID predicted 60-40. We are probably, I don't know that we're totally swapped, but closer to being totally swapped after COVID.
So 60 year-round, 40 seasonal, or vice versa?
60 around 40 seasonal.
Okay, and now it's 40 year-round, 60 seasonal.
No, we were
Okay.
60-40.
Okay.
We're 60 seasonal, 40 permanent. We're probably closer to being 60 year-round and 40 seasonal.
Wow, that's surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very surprising.
We took
That's like almost eerily surprising.
we took a big jump
I have to
after.
let it settle in for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go
You
ahead.
don't see that though when you go around the lakes during the week,
Right.
because you look at homes and you think, is that person there or
Maybe they
not?
just moved here for
And
tax.
it's probably
And I'm
80-20.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying totally,
Right,
I'm saying
within-
closer,
Sure.
but
But a pretty significant shift either. It went from one side of the bell-shaped curve to the other side.
But we have 100% fiber through the community. So if you were someone that could work from home, you likely sold a house in an urban area and
Right.
moved here because
Right.
you could be in your home, working from home.
But more likely than not, you'd have to be of a certain income level to make that work, at least at scale.
You were probably of a certain income level because you had 2 homes.
Very true.
Yeah.
So why is all that important? Whatever, regardless of the numbers. the year-round residents are, this is what counts for median age. If you're not a year-round resident, your age, whatever that age may be, is calculated in some other place. So it's skewed that way significantly. So it's not as if, oh my goodness, right? It's more along the lines of, oh, the numbers, but, oh yeah, okay, this explains a little bit of it. So be shocked, but don't be shocked. Median household income, again, not surprising that has grown. Everybody knows the difference between median and mean, right? Mean is the average, so if Bill Gates moves into town, your mean income goes through the roof. Mean is when you take the lowest and the highest and throw it away, and the lowest and highest, and you keep on doing it until you get to the one in the middle. So median household income went from 50 to 64 over 20 years. Pretty significant, again, when you consider what happened between 2007 and 2011, the Great Recession. If you look at housing market right now, I mean, the housing market collapsed, but by 2013 it recovered, and now it's so far beyond the bubble that exploded back in 2007. Bachelor's degree or higher, slight decrease, but again, that's probably a result of these changing demographic stuff that we were just discussing a bit. It's not as if people stopped pursuing their education. The race, again, not surprising here, it's an overwhelmingly white community. 2 or more races has grown though, from 0.8 to 2.8. All others from 0.8 to 1.9. And the asterisks are data from 2010 because the 2000 data wasn't available online anymore. Census Bureau did some silly things over the last handful of years, and it's a little bit harder to find some of the stuff that we always used to find quite easily. Again, another otter. So any questions about the demographics? So community growth, projected growth is going to look a lot like the growth that's occurred over the past 20 years, meaning it's going to skew towards 65 and older. But you have to recognize that that's a relatively smaller percentage of the actual population because of the year-round seasonal issue. So if we were in Door County right now, up in Vilas County where our cabin is, we'd be having these same kinds of discussions, right? Down in Oconomowoc, there are those places around the state where that's an issue. So probably no interest in the results of the survey, right? So 157 completed the survey online. And before we jump into here, so unless the community is running, not walking mind you, but running away from the 2018 outdoor recreation plan, the 2018 outdoor recreation plan is going to be the DNA of the 2023-2024 plan, right? Some things have changed. The survey will help me get an idea of what I think has changed so that I can write it into the draft. And then you as a committee first, and then you as a community second, will look it over and say, yeah, no, that's not what that meant, Jeff. This is what, and you'll make it yours. So, as I said before, when that day comes where you look at the first draft, I assure you it will not be my recommendation for what the town of Rome should do. I have an ego, I'm not that arrogant. It's my understanding what I believe would benefit this community based upon the information I have coming from you. So it might be a subtle difference, but it's a pretty significant difference there. So you had the visual preference survey back in 2018. Much of that is probably still valid, right? It's not like everybody said, oh, we loved prairie plants back then. Oh, we can't stand them now. Bees, too many bees, we don't like bees. So that's what the survey is about. That the survey fills in, it attacks the VPS, it attacks the same question the VPS addressed, but in a slightly different way. And it will help guide me in preparing the first draft update, again, using the 2018 document as a starting point. So with that in mind, how satisfied are you with the availability of outdoor recreation facilities in the town of Rome? Nearly 80% said, yep, satisfied or very satisfied. 1 out of 5 said, unsatisfied or very unsatisfied. So that's important to know, right? The obvious question that we don't know yet, but we'll want to try to flesh out is, what is it about those 1 in 10 people, or 1 in 5 people, who answered that way? More likely than not, it's because there's something that they really like to do that isn't here. We want more of this stuff. Sure, you got a lot of that stuff, but we don't do that stuff, we want this stuff. Tickling George Carlin with the stuff discussion. Why did you just beat, no, go away, it doesn't matter. How often do you visit an outdoor well, I guess maybe you are gonna stick around. So just so you know, that's my daughter requesting more time on her iPad. No, Kate. How often do you visit an outdoor recreation facility in the town? So it's pretty good. I mean, 70% visit at least once a month. That's good, right? That's what we want. But more than a quarter really don't. Maybe once or twice a year, not at all. Question for them, of course, is why not? Well, more likely than not, it's because whatever it is that they value most is in here. That doesn't mean that you have to create it here, right? But it does say, that's the thing about a survey, right? If you ask 10 questions, once you look at the results, you go, oh my God, there's like 20 more questions we have to ask. So you ask those 20 questions, and there's like 50 more. So invariably, you have to stop peeling away at the onion and just take a bite. And that's essentially what we're doing here. But this is important. It's important for you as a committee first, and then you as a community second, to kind of ask yourselves, what, because everybody in this room knows infinitely more about the town of Rome than I do, what do you think those numbers represent? What do you think's missing here? Because you're gonna know that stuff and I'm not. How close is the nearest outdoor recreation facility to you? So almost 1/4 said walking or biking distance. That's good, right? So you don't have to get into your car and drive. You add the biking to it, and now you're looking at half the people in the community can get to where they want to go or get to the nearest outdoor recreation facility without having to drive in a car. But about a quarter do have to get in their car. So that means, well, that means that there aren't any outdoor recreation facilities located within walking distance for 1/4 of the population. So that's a mental note I would make going forward. When we prepare the outdoor recreation plan map, the updated map, and when we look at what facilities, what assets are currently underrepresented in this community, what we want to say is, okay, if we're gonna do this, where do we put it? The first inclination is gonna be a place, you have a couple really beautiful parks, and it's like, oh, let's put it there. Maybe spend $1 or $2 over there and $1 or $2 over there. And sometimes it's just a really small pocket park or a really small neighborhood park. Someplace where, you know, that 25-year-old dad whose wife is working in Stevens Point can get up at 10 o'clock walk away from the desk at 10 o'clock on a beautiful Saturday morning with his 2 children and walk to that park. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Which of the following outdoor recreation facilities in or near the town have you visited during the past year? Who wants to guess the top one?
Splash
That's cool, I like that.
pad. It is splash pad adjacent. It is.
It's splash pad adjacent.
I was thinking,
That one, again, that's anomalous statewide. Obvious why here, Syracuse and other things, obvious why it's high here. But that number typically is in the high teens, low 20s in other rural tourism parts of the state. Even up in Vilas County, Oneida County, Forest County, where there are a lot of snowmobile trails and a lot of ATV trails. Lakewood, for instance, has trails that run Lakewood Townsend Mountain all the way up to Wabeno. That number is higher than it is in other places, but it's not 50%. So that's good. That's good when you know who you are and you know what you need. Town Center Park, Lake Arrowhead Golf Course, and I'm not going to narrate the rest of these. I'll play them up unless there's one that. There you go.
There we go.
So, top 5.
Like Camelot boat launch. That one's surprising.
course.
Question, how possible is it that some of the answers to this survey could skew the results?
Do you wanna go backwards, is that what you said, Laura? Okay, let me back up, then here you go.
The results could get skewed in light of the fact that only 157 people responded, or the whole community. So that means like one club or group or whatever could say, hey, people, fill out that form and put down ATVs, because that's, this is
Right.
gonna help us or
Right.
do something in some way. So how do you view that when you look at this, that that's a possibility given that very small, I think it's a relatively small number in that survey. Is that a small number for a community our size to have returned for a survey? 157 out of 3,000?
Well, it is the number,
It is the number you have
whether
to work
it's
with.
small or, right.
Right.
So first of all, it's a fantastic question, and it's absolutely appropriate to everything that's gonna happen when I leave tonight, all the way until at some point this goes before the village board, town board for adoption. What's the answer to the question? First one is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you can lead a horse to water, right? So every election, there's a certain percentage of people who show up. When they're the big ones, the number's higher, when they're little ones, the number's lower. Those who show up, they reap the benefits, right? So if you believe strongly in this particular person to be this particular position, get as many of the people who share your thoughts and pack the polling booth. Does that happen? Absolutely. Does it happen enough to like pervert the process? Not that I've ever bumped into.
Okay.
However, the smaller the number, the greater the probability. That aside, I think all of you are gonna know what numbers truly reflect the real, the on the ground issues here, and which ones do not. In a way that I won't. But more importantly, the survey itself doesn't create the outdoor recreation plan. The survey is one piece of information. So again, I mentioned we have an existing outdoor recreation plan. There are things about that plan that you as a community probably like. There are things about that plan that you probably don't like. So one of the things I'm gonna ask of you tonight, and I might as well say it right now, but I'll say it again later, is once I leave, for those of you who are on the committee, if you don't have a copy of the previous plan, please get your hands on it and look it over with a red pen and highlight the stuff that we thought then, yes, but not now. Let's get rid of that. What often happens with a comprehensive plan, and to a lesser degree with outdoor recreation plan, is we put too much stuff in it. Well, we gotta put this in there, we gotta put this in there. And there's a decent argument for that in the sense of, if you're fishing with a big net, the probability of catching a bunch of fish is high. But you don't really know what kind of fish you're gonna catch when you're throwing a big net up. If you make it more streamlined, make it more focused, it's great if you know exactly what it is that you wanna pursue. So if there's a community out there that says, we want an aquatic park, there's none around here, that's our focus, we're gonna build this outdoor recreation plan, not exclusively for that, but certainly so that's the main feature. Our fundraising activities, our grant applications, our budgeting, our capital improvements plan, all that stuff is gonna be oriented towards that one or those three things that we really wanna focus on. That's what I'll request of you as a committee. Look at your current plan. Highlighter, yes, let's keep going here. Red pen, not so much here. If you don't mind providing that information to Jamie funnels it to me, and when I'm putting together the first draft, I will de-emphasize or eliminate certain things based upon your input. I'll add greater emphasis to other things. That's where the survey plays a role, but not nearly as much as what you as a committee are going to direct me towards. One other thing before I forget, Jamie, I was gonna send an email and I forgot. If you could put together a summary of successful implementation, things that were part of the 2018, 2023 document that you've taken steps towards, that you've achieved, that's good, because what I wanna do is build that into the front end of the outdoor recreation plan. Again, so when that person's sitting at their desk in Chicago or Milwaukee or Madison, flips over the page, sees this hopefully very attractive outdoor recreation plan, opens the page, they see, oh my goodness, this was the 2020 or 2018 plan, this were their priority areas, and they ticked off however many they ticked off. We want to do that. We want to say, this is a community that actually implements this stuff that we create. We don't do it and then it gets lost somewhere in the back room. Long-winded response to a very simple question. So, how does this stuff play in? It's more information, but it's not a determining factor. Unless it's just crazy, right? You have a farmer's market, 82% of the people like the farmer's market. I would say, don't get rid of the farmer's market. And see, that's why you're paying me the big bucks. Lake Arrowhead boat launch. So as the numbers go down, keep in mind, 20% doesn't look all that impressive when compared with 81.9%, but 20% means if there's 10 people in this room, right? 2 of those people, right? Planner, not engineer. 2 of those people feel really strongly about this thing, and that's enough, right? Because multiply that, extrapolate 157 to the full population, those 2 people represent a pretty decent chunk of people. Can everybody read these okay? Because if you can't, okay, good. Otherwise you have to listen to me talk some more. The deer case one is interesting, right? Because I think what I would have suspected, and not that I think 20% plus or minus is high or low, but because of its uniqueness in the state, basically like an amusement park for ATVs, UTVs, dirt bikes and such, there aren't a lot of them in the state. There are lots of places you can go and ride, but not like that. Crandon has its off-road thing. I would have not been surprised had that number been low from the local population, and yet the place is bursting at the seams because everybody comes.
There's a lot of truth in that statement, yeah. There's
Right.
a lot of people who come from out of town.
Absolutely, of course, because if you have those toys, even if you have places you love to go other than Syracuse, you're going to go to Syracuse because why wouldn't you, right? So the fact that 20% of the people who took the survey, presumably residents but not necessarily residents, value that highly, that's good to know. So again, numbers get lower, but still not insignificant. Pickleball is a good example. The example I used to use was skate parks. Now it's pickleball. And we can talk about pickleball if you'd like, because pickleball is one of those, but skate parks used to be the thing. You'd have 1,000 people complete the survey, and 17 would say, let's have a skate park. But those 17 were passionate, and they had money, and they were going to put their money in, and they were going to help you write the grants, and they were going to design the park, and they were going to help build the park. So don't let the low number, the low percentage, be too much of a determining factor. Use that, and again, in concert with what you know about the community. So if there are a lot of kids on the highways, on skateboards, or riding BMX bikes, probably they're doing that because there's no other place for them to ride skateboard and BMX bikes, right? So I'm not suggesting you build a skate park or BMX park. I'm just saying that there might be low numbers, but there's a passionate audience for that. Tennis courts, right? I mean, when I grew up, for baby boomers, the 1960s and 1970s, tennis was huge, right? I mean, I loved McEnroe, but I also loved Borg. Talk about 2 opposites, right? One like nitroglycerin wrapped in titanium dynamite, and the other one like absolutely emotionless. Tennis now is different. I mean, it's still cool, still good, but it's not the passion it was back then. Things change. So you may have a strong existing demand for tennis, but it's being drowned out by the demand for pickleball. So I don't know what the numbers are. I think, if I remember right, it was 15 or 20 million pickleball players in the United States. And there's still something like 110 million tennis players, right? So pickleball is newer. It's kind of like inline skating in the early to mid 1980s. It was a big, big thing. Coming back now too, weirdly, or delightfully. So again, don't let the numbers be the determining factor. Use them as you consider what things to go after. Nice thing about pickleball courts, tennis courts to a somewhat lesser degree, is they tend to be less expensive than some of the other facilities. If you're not going with lots of lighting and all that fun stuff. Excuse me. I love that you have kayak launches now, by the way. Those are relatively new, aren't they?
It is new.
Yeah, make sure all that stuff, if you don't mind, Jamie, because it just ties so cleanly and so directly to the implementation recommendations from the current plan.
Chelsea definitely did put a survey.
So again, when you look at natural areas, they're often lower in terms of the percentage that people use them, but not in terms of the value that they have to the community as a whole. So even people who will never go to Arctic National Wildlife Refuge value it because the caribou herd, right? Similar thing, different scale locally. Often and I alluded to this earlier, often what prevents people from using natural areas is, be careful how I say this, this almost religious dogmatic belief that you can't put any structures in a natural area. It's a natural area, right? Totally get it. But when you do that, you're also saying, oh, by the way, we're gonna exclude everybody over this age group, or this age. We're gonna exclude everybody in this age. And then anybody who inherited their mom's bladder, sorry mom, right? So when you don't have some sort of facility in these places, it excludes people. People are not gonna go out there knowing, I can't walk a half mile in, even though physically I can if I don't, right? So keep those numbers in mind.
Plus the ticks.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say ticks?
Ticks.
Yeah, that too.
We got a grant to exterminate them.
Bring in more possums.
Well,
There we go.
how about getting it, well, yeah, it's more mosquitoes.
Bring in more possums. Strategic tick
And
initiative.
bats eat them too.
Yep.
That's what I was gonna say. Bats could use some help right now. So, which of the following prevent you from using parks? Good one, right? More than 40% saying nothing, I use them. Great. Don't know what is offered. That's good too, because it's easy to address that. Use the town website, use social media, use word of mouth, trumpet the stuff that you have. Too busy? Well, that's a cop-out answer, I think, but some people are too busy. Not interested? Yeah, well, that's okay. You know, we're not gonna make you go to the splash pad. Accessibility, that's one that should be addressed, but tends to be a little bit more expensive. Facilities, amenities desired, not offered. And the next question, of course, is what are those facilities? And we'll see the answer to those questions coming up. Safety concerns? Yeah, I think, I mean, you know this, right? Back when I was a kid, right, everything was safer. No, it wasn't. It was not. We didn't know as much about it because we didn't have the internet and we didn't have cable news and we didn't have 24-hour this and 24-hour that. But so I think safety concerns may not be factually as high as some people believe, but that doesn't mean it's not incredibly high for the person who said, I have concerns for my safety. So somehow you want to convey these parks are well lit, well maintained, there's lots of people using them. The best way to make sure no weird stuff happens on a trail or in a park is to have lots of eyes using that trail in that park. People tend to not do that stuff. Another thing is if you have issues with vandalism in parks, generally don't, and no disrespect to anybody over the age of 70, but you generally don't have a whole bunch of 70, 80-year-olds going out and vandalizing parks, right? Generally that skews towards a different group. So one of the ways that you can help there is get those groups involved in outdoor recreation planning, outdoor recreation design. Because if I'm 15 years old and I and my friends just spent 20 hours over the last 3 days doing this, that, and the other thing, and then somebody tags it, everybody in that school knows exactly who did it in about 10 minutes, right? And they don't have to call Jamie or call the police, all they have to do is settle it, right? When you build that kind of stakeholder group into the process, you tend to get the protections associated with it. Utilities in other communities, that's fine, right? There's stuff that you don't have here, and maybe it's outdoor pools, or maybe it's water parks, or whatever the case may be. Difficulty finding parking. Which of the following, if available, would you or someone in your family engage in? That didn't surprise me, doesn't surprise me when it's number one in other communities. It did surprise me here. So it's cool. It's easy too, right? I don't know whether there's any food truck culture here, whether it's small but growing. Sorry?
We've started
Yeah, it's
using food trucks.
brilliant. It brings people together, it makes people smile. Things like that, movies in the park, music in the park, that kind of stuff. Again, relatively inexpensive, great way of building community. Right? And good food. Community festivals and events. ATV, UTV trails, again, that number is never this high. Fishing. Again, you notice, right? Food truck, community festival events, outdoor movies, music, performances. Obviously, you have the park now with the facilities, existing facilities and soon-to-be facilities that will accommodate this stuff very, very well. Oops.
We
How
have
much more
many
mini golf
though.
do we need? Hey, Rob Ziegler took the survey.
It's too big though.
Climbing wall.
That was interesting.
Those are really, really growing in popularity, even with really,
Zip
really
line.
littles. Because you can have the small ones with the really soft landing, and then you get to the bigger ones where you have to be harnessed in. And
Do that at Deer Cruise.
water park, I would not consider one of the low cost
No,
ticket.
that was, yeah,
You
we
A little bit
said
more
zip line.
expensive.
She said zip line.
But then again, how much do you need a water park when you live in a water park, right?
How would grant opportunities affect a private-public partnership, i.e. seeking somebody to operate a climbing wall zip line on public property that was modified via public funds?
Sure, good question. So, most of the grant funding out there is to actually buy stuff, build stuff, create stuff. Not a lot of it is available to actually serve the stuff and maintain the stuff. That's where the grant agencies say, we helped you get the water park. Now you have to hire and you have to maintain and you have to do that kind of stuff.
So
So
if
the
we
part-
went after a climbing wall, hiring or, seeking a vendor to run that,
That is an interesting option, right? That's what many communities are doing right now. They'll hire out the concessions at a park, or they'll hire out the lifeguard responsibilities. If you, right, if you have businesses in the community that have deep roots in the community that are willing to support this stuff, that's the first place I would go before going outside of the community.
I think there's barriers to entry that, somebody would be interested in starting that business that has a passion for it, but the
Absolutely.
barrier to building a climbing wall is high, land, et cetera.
Sure, and again, it's all about scale and scope too, because a small climbing wall is part of an accessible park. I mean, it's not $20, but it's not tens of thousands of dollars either. But the one that you think of when you think of, those are expensive, tens of thousands of dollars.
Because I know the community I'm from in southeastern Wisconsin, Kenosha County has a private-public partnership
And that's, so, to get back to the guts of your question, public-private partnerships are fantastic. If you if they're out there, find them, use them. If the question is, does a public-private partnership increase the likelihood for grant funding, the answer to that question is absolutely yes. The staffing part of it and such, that's probably gonna be the burden of the general fund, and then whatever the private partnership. So I'm presuming if it's a public-private partnership and the private is the operating part of it, there are gonna be fees, right? You have to pay $10 or whatever it is to use that, and they're gonna use that to staff the facility. Let me ponder that a little bit more and we'll come back to it.
A question.
Yes, ma'am?
So if the average age is 63.4, but yet we're kind of looking at things that are cool, be nice to build or have, climbing walls, zip line, I don't think, I'm not saying 63.4 and above age people don't use those things, but it seems younger people are more apt to use those things. But we've got this huge influx of population on the weekends, so we
Mhm.
go from 3,000 to 12,000, 15,000.
Right.
Those people would all use those things.
Correct.
And so for a cooperation with tourism and the town, which one, how do you balance it if you're gonna put money at that?
That's why you're here.
Well, but I mean, because some of it brings in money to the
Mhm.
town, you can charge for these things. I'm just saying, say Syracuse put in zip lines. Okay, now it becomes an ATV adventure park with
Maybe
zip
people use
lines.
Mhm.
Extra 4 days a week.
And,
That's called a recreational industry
Rec-
cluster. When
right.
you actually use one
And-
thing to build off collateral stuff.
and it's not currently open every day, it has limited days that it's open, and that might skew some of these numbers, why not more people go there, because it's primarily open on the weekends.
Right, but that would be the main Syracuse facility,
Yes,
but you could see potentially the cluster off stuff having a different set of operating hours.
right, so I guess that's a decision the community makes, is do we want to fulfill the needs of the 63.4-year-old people? Or who might go and zip line? I mean, I would,
I think if we
Or
went back a
the-
slide, the question was, I think you were a family member?
or someone in your family engage in,
And,
yeah.
most people over 63 have grandkids,
So that's extrapolating to that group too. So, yeah, I'm just sort of
Go ahead,
thinking
Lori.
this through.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Madam Chair.
No, don't. I think it's called balance, but that was always the thought with Syracuse, cause it's our profit center. But
Mhm.
then you said something about a recreation industry cluster.
Mhm.
So we often had ideas about that because it's a profit center, but then we ran into issues, and I don't know, maybe you know, has that changed? Where some of our grants were an issue because the DNR frowned on us making money there. So when you use it as a recreation industry cluster, does that change? Are you familiar with any of that at all, Jeff?
Yeah, bet. Yeah, so certain grants aren't available to for-profit recreation facilities. But quite a few of them are, because the argument is that, well, it's a for-profit, they can collateralize that on their own without state funding going in, essentially without our taxes going in, right? So if you're going after grant funding and you have a partner that is private sector, that is willing to provide financial support, in-kind contribution, et cetera, that will elevate the ranking of that grant. However, if the target of that grant is a facility that is actually going to be for-profit use, you're not, in many cases, you're not eligible to go after that grant. That make sense?
Right.
So I guess what I would say is, when I think of outdoor recreation funding at the local level, I see the public-private partnerships in two ways. One, if I can get a bunch of those groups, those private sector groups, to sign on and support this application, it looks stronger. But when I can't get grant funding for something everybody wants, that's when I'm going to the public or the private sector and saying, listen, there's no way to get grant funding for this, can you help? And their answer might be, sure, however, we wanna then have an entrance fee, and that's something that would be between the town board and the businesses. So it's not so much saying, public-private has to be used for this and this and this and this and this. You look at each need and you pick the right partners, the right tools to achieve that goal. There was another thought that was there for a moment, but I think it went chewing on a different track while I was talking. Probably come back to it though.
That's okay.
Or completely forget about it.
That's all right.
If it's the latter, it probably wasn't important, as all of our grandparents would have said. I think we went through most of this stuff, down to here. Yeah, some of the challenges with sledding and ice skating and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I grew up on the Wolf River. I mean, ice skating is like DNA, right? It's just really, really tough to do now. You know, you can say, well, yeah, we'll just have an area and we'll fill it up, except, you know, when I was a kid, you'd have a full thaw cycle over a winter once every 3 or 4 years. And now, I'm not sure about here, but now in the Fox Cities, it's 4 or 5 times every year. And it destroys the ice. So if there's a little bit of junk ice, you can't put good water on top, it just doesn't work. So what you'll see is the growth in ice skating in Wisconsin now is almost completely private sector generated by benefactors who build these amazing things. So in Neenah, Bergstrom, which is one of the larger car dealerships in Wisconsin, built this amazing facility modeled on Rockefeller Center in New York City. And it's truly amazing. And they can do it because it doesn't care what the temperature is. You can make ice when it's 70 degrees, and they've done it. It's difficult to do ice skating rinks without having that infrastructure there. Sledding, same basic principle, although you don't really need a whole lot of infrastructure for a sledding though, right? I mean, ideally, if it's a big hill, you might have a tow rope, you might have a warming shed or a little fire pit or something, but you don't really need that. All you need is a hill, and the people use it when it snows and don't when it doesn't.
Two good needs.
Tubing, right?
Snow.
Snow.
You make that.
Hey, they're lawn games, 24%. Go bocce ball.
Go Tai Chi.
Tai Chi, exactly. Aggravated. No, I'm not gonna do that. Archery.
Archery, wow.
You said archery.
Public art, street art, and murals gets a little bit complicated because it's First Amendment protected free speech. So you basically have to build it into your zoning ordinance under sign regulations.
We're working on a public art ordinance.
Good luck.
We'll do it.
Oh, no,
I'm on the planning commission.
it's really complicated. The Supreme Court punted on art and murals.
What?
So there have been 2 Supreme Court rulings regarding signage. One was Reed versus Town of Gilbert back in 2015, which was a unanimous decision.
The state
Yeah.
Supreme Court or the feds?
The United States Supreme Court, man.
SCOTUS? Really?
What's that?
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so back in 2015, Anthony Scalia wrote thank you, God. It was a majority because it was unanimous. But he wrote it, and it basically said sign regulations must be content neutral. Sounds simple, right? It's not simple. It means that you cannot regulate signs based upon what the signs say. And it's really, really complicated. We talked about the onion earlier. This is like 9 or 10 or 15 levels deep into the onion. And then in 2018, in Reagan National versus Austin, the Supreme Court, no, I'm sorry, in 2022, last year, sorry, the Supreme Court again unanimously ruled that as an exception, you can use the message on a billboard to determine whether it's an off-premises sign or not. So if you prohibit off-premises signs, if you prohibit billboards, you can actually look at what it says on the billboard. You can't regulate the content, but you can look at it, and if it says McDonald's, and then there's not a McDonald's here, that's an off-premises sign. They punted, they passed on everything to do with murals and public art. but Justice Alito and I think Justice Sotomayor, so keep in mind you're talking about very right and moderately left, came together on the decision saying, we know that this is an issue and we're waiting for a case to come before us. We're not gonna rule on this until we have a case. So what'll happen is all these sign ordinances that I wrote trying to get clever to allow murals in a way that doesn't allow somebody to put a sign up that is as large as a mural, it'll all be rendered moot once they make their decision. But it's gonna be difficult, so keep that in mind. Maybe if you wanna chat afterwards, I can give you some information.
Very interesting.
Open the floodgates.
Yeah,
But
Jack, it's
murals
maybe that ATV
and
goes
art
to the door.
are constitutionally protected free speech in the same way adult entertainment is. And you have to be very, very careful when you write it. And I don't mean that to be, please, I apologize for how that sounds. It makes me sound pretentious and arrogant. But you have to be very, very careful when you write that stuff.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm noticed, thank you.
I can just see it now.
Remember, these are recorded.
Oh, shuffle.
now you remind me.
Thank you. Shuffleboard.
So foraging, on one of the outdoor recreation plans I did recently, foraging was, I think, 30%. And it wasn't a community where I would have expected it, so I think they probably go somewhere else.
Let's go.
The mushrooms.
Let's plant some mushrooms. How about foraging for other items?
Yeah.
Yeah, basketball courts, right? This were the 1980s, 1990s, build them, build them, build them. Not so much right now. Of course, Magic and Larry and Michael played a little bit of a role in that. Okay, so 0.7, back up, sorry about that, 0.7 is one person. So you may recall on many of these questions, the last option was other, and then I asked whoever asked the respondent to write it in. There were a lot, mostly, almost entirely one person, some commonality, lots of, we'd like more trails, we want more natural areas and prairies and stuff like that, whatever. That will be in the appendix of the report. It's just, it would have taken a lot to put it into here. Which of the following would you like to see at town parks? Sidewalks, paths, and trails, again, not surprising. Benches and seating, restrooms. So this was the one that the committee recommended you put in. And I assume there was a reason for it, and yeah, 40% of the people said,
That was all the.
That was me.
there you go.
Shady area, yeah. Good deal.
The landscaping part was built in pretty, I think if I remember right, it was built in pretty well into your current plan. But that's one of those things, if you forgive my proselytizing for a moment, I'll step over here. Good. If you looked at all this and said, great, Jeff, put that all away and just tell us the 3 things we need to do. 3 things. Trees, trails, prairies. You could solve more problems in the United States, health, environment, economic, with those 3 things than any of this other stuff. Trails, because there's just reams of data that show the percentage and or mileage of trails that exist in a community is the primary determining factor of community health. Now, correlation and causation, right? So you have to keep that in mind. But it has been documented so many times in the United States, urban, rural, mountain, east, south, north, all over the place. So that's pretty confident. Trees have great benefits. They're nice, they're pretty to look at, they provide shade, they sequester carbon, they, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But prairie plants, planting prairie on a square foot by square foot basis exceeds everything else that you could possibly do in terms of collateral benefits. Right? First one is it provides habitat for bees and butterflies and pollinators, and we know pollinators are not doing particularly well right now. And if they go away, we go away. Pretty straight line between those. Lose bees, lose food, lose humans. In terms of appearance, they're pretty. In terms of maintenance, zero, right? You don't have to mow prairies, you don't have to fertilize prairies, and you don't have to irrigate prairies. They have root systems that go down 5 to 15 feet into the soil, and those root systems create conveyances for stormwater infiltration. So the more prairie you have, even little prairie, if you can shift some parking lot runoff to the prairie, less infrastructure costs for curb and gutter and sewer. Storm sewer is frighteningly expensive. All that hard stuff, right? I don't know what portion of your budget goes towards roads. It's up there a ways, right? Infrastructure is expensive. So, and the nice thing about prairies is they're very inexpensive no matter how you look at it. An acre, putting in an acre of grass, whether you put in turf or whether you plant seeds and nurture it, costs considerably more than putting an acre of prairie in. And then once again, 3 years after a prairie's been planted, you leave it alone. Once every 2 or 3 years, you burn it if you can do a prescribed burn, which is a boatload of fun. If you ever have an opportunity to do it, I highly recommend it. It's one of the coolest things in life. If you can't do it, you just mow it really, really low before the prairie plants come up to knock the weeds down. But again, no watering, no maintenance. So one of my clients recently adopted outdoor recreation plan. They were looking at 40% of their turf grass within in this case, the village-owned properties, mostly parks, but also properties, 40% transitioning away from turf grass to prairie. And they hired someone, after I did the plan, they hired someone a lot smarter than me to come in and calculate what that would mean, and the numbers were kind of shocking in terms of stormwater benefits, in terms of reduced expenditures for staff, for fuel, in terms of wear and tear on equipment, machines that were lasting, machines that are designed to last 1,500 hours are wearing out in 4 or 5 years. They calculate that they'll now last 10 years, and when you talk about like tool cats and some of the skid steers and some of those things, I mean, they're not cheap. So anyways, I'll back to my original role here. Prairies are a cool thing, they're relatively easy. Kids love to do it, and once you start a small batch, bring all the kids out every fall with buckets and just have them shake off into the pail, and you go over here and you dump the pail over there, and then you got prairie here, and you just keep on Johnny Appleseeding your way around the neighborhood. All right, sorry about that. I hope you found that enjoyable. Parking improvements, grills, picnics, tables, maintenance, right? So again, it's almost always there. Barrier-free recreation. Lighting's important, but you have to be careful with lighting in a rural setting, right? Done well, done poorly, right? So make sure it's the right kind of lighting, make sure it's shielded. LEDs are a little bit expensive up front, but you can have timing dimmers on them, so they stand all night, but they're lower, and then all that kind of stuff. All right, this is the question that came from the committee. Town is in the process of adding a basketball court and 4 pickleball courts to our parks. How supportive of you are adding to tennis courts? So if you'd like a tennis court, 47% said sure, 27% said nah, okay, no, and then 23 like no. So some support for it clearly, which we'll get to when we pull up the drawing at the tail end of the evening. COVID-19 pandemic has made you more likely, less likely, etc. So the numbers that have come out from the other 3 that I've done, the more likely was the highest, and it was around 50 to 60%. So the upside here is, no more or less. Why is that? Well, because this is such an outdoor recreation oriented community anyway. Many of those other this community in particular I'm thinking of is much more of a urbanized indoor thing. So clearly shifting away from going to the community center 3 times a week to going for a walk outside 3 times a week makes sense when you're in 2020 and 2021. How supportive are you of town creating new parks and recreation areas? 82%. Now the question, of course, and Jamie and I talked about this briefly over the phone, is, well, what does that mean, right? So if I said, how supportive are you of creating new parks and recreation areas if it means your taxes are gonna go up by $500 a year?
There we-
That number goes down.
There we, it's a different question.
But if you say, and if the question comes up, and it will, right? When you point out that it's really difficult to raise taxes at the local level. Mill rates and all that stuff that everybody in here knows more than I do. It's very, very difficult to raise taxes. So it's not about raising our taxes to fund this stuff. The vast majority of this stuff is gonna get funded by grant funding, partnerships, and the existing general fund. Not bringing in new money, but, I'm sorry, not raising taxes, but bringing new money that comes with increased development. So the taxes that are generated from increased development goes into a fund to fund this kind of stuff. It doesn't affect individual taxpayers the way many individual taxpayers believe it might. But again, there's a bunch of people in this room that know everything I said better than I just said, right? So, the number means something. It means the people who answered this question, of those 157, 80% said, yes, create more. They also said, yes, provide more public access to natural and open space, similar percentage, right? And yes, please, let's do a link to the lakes town-wide system of walking and bicycling paths. So again, there's general consistency with those first three questions. Now, deep down inside, the people answering these questions, whether they're going thumbs up, thumbs down, or in between, they know that this stuff costs money. And they may not know whether it's their money that it's gonna cost, or it's their neighbor's money, or it's general fund or grants. But still, I think everybody intuitively knows these things don't come for free. But you're still getting that percent, or that support for it. So that's good, that's a good message to convey. How willing are you to play outside if there's fun stuff to do outside? 77%, right? Now, again,
12 people.
outside, I'm sorry?
It's a very small number of people that are actually here in the winter, year-round, so.
Very true. Again, that's the thing about, what did Twain say? There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. What was that? Was that Mark Twain? Will Rogers. I think it might have been Will Rogers. I conflate the two, because, communities that embrace winter have lots of outdoor activities in winter, lots of participation in outdoor activity in winter. Communities that turn their back on winter don't. So no one's saying that you have to be one or the other, but if you choose to be the one that encourages and advocates for it, easy things first, right? Have an event every single month during winter. Maybe have a couple events every single month, whether it's the usual kind of, chainsaw ice carvings or something. Or weird sort of races. You have to dress in this and you push a sled and it has 2 kids in it. Anything, just get people out to do it and have fun. Excuse me. Where should the town prioritize future parks and recreation funding? Preserving natural resources, 86.6%. Developing new parks and trails. Upgrading existing facilities. Providing indoor recreation facilities. Expanding programs and services. Developing new parks. So you remember there was 80% support for developing new parks and outdoor recreation facilities. But when asked the question, with whatever amount of funding we have, where would you prioritize it? So this is how we kind of figure out how to write the outdoor recreation plan. Yes, ma'am?
What's interesting where it says expanding programs and services, 50.3%. It may have something to do with the weather today, but at the library when I stopped in, the community room was filled with people doing Tai Chi. It might have had something, but I mean, I often wondered through the years, with Parks and Rec, if we offered more community program, especially in the summer when grandparents and parents, bring their kids up here for grandparents, if we had more programming. Because when our son was little, and we sent him here for grandma and grandpa, he had tons of things to do.
Right.
Boating classes, swimming classes, played cards with grandma and grandpa and learned how to gamble. I mean, all kinds of things, so I mean, it would be nice if we. Huh? But he learned how to play bocce ball, I mean, so it would would be nice if we could eventually expand programs, because 50% is, it would be nice if we had some summer programming for young
Absolutely.
people.
So again, this is just off the cuff, but you have this growing and expanding park, right?
Yeah.
And the more assets you add to it, the more of a market it creates.
Right.
So if you can afford the staffing and you create some sort of drop your kids off for 2 hours during this program, or sign them in and drop them off for however long over the course of the day kind of thing, basically a park program, right? Let the parkies run it. Those are popular, right?
And there's lots of volunteers at the two churches.
Absolutely.
And there's also cops and bobbers and reading at the library, so you can get it that way. So you can start out relatively.
Volunteers
But we
and
do
cha-
need staff at Public Works and grow it that way too.
Volunteers and champions, right?
Yes.
No matter what you plan, get as many of those as you can. The champions are the ones who are just gonna keep
Right.
talking about it, and the volunteers are the ones who just keep showing up, so. as
It's just a
many
nice
of
way
those.
to expand our programming when you look at that 50%, you know, it's another.
Compared to other priorities, how important it is to develop and maintain outdoor recreation facilities and services. I mean, not too far away from 9 out of 10. How supportive are you partnering with nearby communities? Drop down to 80%. That was a little bit of surprise. I'm wondering if there is an issue that might have happened between.
Surprised it's not lower.
What's wrong with 80%?
Nothing wrong with it, but usually that number's higher. Usually when you say, how supportive are you of partnering with the town next door, or the village over there, or the county, people are like, oh yeah, bring them, you know.
I would have been interested to see what it said about partnering with Wood County versus.
Oh,
Adams
right.
County.
I remember, I mean, I haven't been here in a while, but I remember the signs. How supportive are you of the town partnering with local businesses, organizations, and community groups to create new outdoor recreation facilities and opportunities? 81.5.
That one is very appropriate.
That's adorable.
So yeah, again,
That's
the
what I'm
survey itself is another piece of information added to the existing information that will allow me to hopefully prepare a first draft that is 70 or 80% of what you want. And then I turn it over to the committee first. We have the working session where we'll kind of talk through the stuff before a public presentation. And you'll say, no. Yeah, more of that, please. And you forgot about this. So then I create it, and now it bumps up to maybe 80% of what you want. We present it to the community, and the community says, no, not that, you know, okay. And then so really we're aiming for as high as we can, knowing that it's never gonna be 100%, right? You're never gonna ask people if puppies and kittens are cute, and there's gonna be someone who says, no, they're not, they're fleas, make me sneeze. Yes, sir.
Yeah, 3 or 4 of us are here from Visit Rome, and we talked today about the trouble we're having securing a TAP grant for the Lake to Lakes project and the tunnel under Route 13. And I was sitting here thinking, you know, and we were talking about ways of modifying the grant next year, maybe decreasing the amount we were asking for, or whatever. And I'm thinking that we really didn't have a whole lot of discussion about including ATVs in that Lake to Lakes project, but given the fact that ATVs and UTVs are so popular, maybe that's something that we ought to include in that TAP grant. And
It's not
broaden-
allowed.
It's
You
not
can't have
allowed.
motorized with.
It's a non-motorized
traffic
grant.
where you have bicycles and pedestrians, I don't think so.
Pedestrian
Well, I
only.
don't know.
They don't.
So I was gonna jump in on both of those, so
It's
thanks.
the criteria of it's not allowed.
So the first thing is there are specific prohibitions associated with many grants, and many of those are prohibitions against motorized. Some of them are prohibitions against horses, not as many, but they're, can't have it if you, and then the other one is the practical application. So again, without taking positions of value on any of the users of a trail, there are uses that are entirely compatible with each other, and you can imagine those, whether they're mechanized or passive. There are certain kinds of mechanized and certain kinds of passive that can be, if not so much compatible, at least rendered less incompatible by the design of the trail and separation and stuff. You cannot have ATVs and UTVs and horses. You can't do that, right? Because death and horror and all kinds of bad stuff. If you have ATVs on a trail, it's gotta be a different kind of trail than it would be if it were a hiking trail or a bicycling trail or even a mountain biking trail. If it's a trail that's used for cross-country skiing, you can't do snowshoes on it because snowshoes wreck the snow for cross-country skiers. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch there. Generally, when you get in, when you start, when a community starts pursuing funding for trails, before you go after it, the first question I would ask would be, who is this specific section of trail for? Who's our target? And if it's for this group and not that group, then you wanna recognize, okay, so we're creating something for this group, but we have to recognize there's a need for that group too. If you're not pursuing a grant and you need funding, that's when ATV users actually come in and save the day. Often to the chagrin of the people who actually started the process of the trail. So, I don't know if there's a trail in northeast Wisconsin called the Mountain Bay Trail. It goes from Wausau to Green Bay, Green Bay. And I was fortunate enough early in my career to be part of the early process of doing that. And the Mountain Bay Trail is a rails to trail, but it was created from the get-go to be an entirely passive trail, no motorized. So if you imagine 100% of the path, or better yet, if it was 100 steps that were necessary to get from, we should do a trail, to, we got a trail. It was 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 87, 91, about 91 or 92, snowmobiles and ATVs jumped in and said, well, we want in on this. And they succeeded. And it's just not used by people who walk anymore. It's not used at all by CrossFit. It's not used by any of the groups. And again, I'm not taking position value for or against. It's just once a certain use comes in, it excludes other uses. So that's why if you're looking at a multimodal trail system, which I think the town wants, you'd want some, just like when you go into a state park, right? There'll be little signs that walking, 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 and then there'll be signs that show the bike and signs that show cross-country skiing, and signs that show snowshoeing. But they tend to diverge. Sometimes they come together, and that's fine if you have a trail system where portions of the system serve everybody, but there are divergent paths that serve specific groups.
Sometimes ATVs and snowmobiles don't even share trails next
ATVs
year.
and snowmobilers don't really get along too well.
No,
Because
even though the
ATVs,
money can be combined to get them more trails, they don't even play nice together. Washburn has a really nice set of silent sport trails, and that's what this is supposed to be about.
yeah, when it comes to, I mean, it's a hard thing for snow. Again, I grew up, when I was a kid, we had ski rules. I don't know if anybody remembers what those were. There were the
Don't
bright
break your
green snowmobile that at one time Arctic Cat was like nothing and Everett and Johnson were nothing. It was Ski Rule and Ski Do were the dominant ones. And we had ski rules until we got Arctic Cats. Everybody had snowmobiles where I was back then. You know, it was one where you had the little thing in the back where all the tools were, because you'd ride for 20 minutes and it'd break down and you have to get out and fix it. Because that's the way it worked back then. The only ATVs were the three-wheeled Honda that James Bond used and you only live twice. Which were fun, right? That balloon-tired three-wheel thing that the moment you turned, you did a header and ran into the tree without a helmet. But it snowed a lot. It snowed differently then than it snows now. The problem with ATVs, if you're a snowmobiler, is it tears up the track for snowmobilers. But if you're a snowmobiler, the comet's coming and you're a T-Rex, right? You once were the biggest, baddest thing, but when it hits, poof. Whereas ATVs you can use whether there's a lot of snow, no snow, and everywhere in between. So, sorry, not taking positions value. The next steps. So once I leave tonight, first thing I'm gonna do is start writing the first draft. And the vast majority of the first stuff is gonna be the stuff that has nothing to do with your values, right? It's gonna be the demographic stuff, it's gonna be the basic description stuff. At some point, when I start putting together the direction that this version of the outdoor recreation plan will take, it'll be after you as a committee meet next. Because again, my request for you as a committee between now and that meeting is each of you individually grab the outdoor recreation plan, either digitally or hard copy, and highlight it in red pen, red pen what you don't like, highlight what you don't, what you do. Get that information to Jamie or Pat, discuss it at the meeting, and Jamie will convey that to me. And then I will massage the recommendations and the plan accordingly in preparation for the working session, which right now I would say better than 50% chance it's in November. Lots of weird stuff happening in the planning world right now, but pretty good chance it's November, better than half. Worst case scenarios would be December. Adopted CORP, very unlikely to happen in 2023. Probably not gonna happen in January, but possibly, but that's okay, because the grant cycles, there are 2 grant cycles, right? There's the spring grant cycle, March application, April application for May granting, and then there's the fall one. The fall is usually the big one. So your timing is very, very good right now. We should get outdoor recreation plan done right around, with a month or 2 to spare before we start looking at what kind of grants we want to pursue.
No, that's the best one.
That's horrible.
Well, so, there's, in our household, there is a adult male and an adult female,
Oh,
and way too many animals. Unfortunately, none of them otters. So, any questions any questions regarding anything that we talked about tonight? We do have one more thing that we're gonna spend the last few minutes talking about. All right. Bob, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Sure. Okay, this is the current thinking of Parks and Recreation Committee for pickleball courts. On the left would be 4 pickleball courts there. That circle oval there is our nature path going around the band shell. And that walkway just to the north of the band shell there will be existing. So above that would be the walkway that we would add to pickleball courts. Whether or not we have a tennis court or not, we could certainly have a tennis court there, which would be the
So,
third one from the left.
4 pickleballs,
Right. And that would
1
be
tennis,
be a
possibly pickleball.
combination tennis and pickleball court, and that would be a dedicated basketball court.
Which way's north, which way's south?
North is above, is straight up.
North is up.
North is up. Got
There's another,
That's a more granular representation of what we're thinking about with dimensions and all. If we could eliminate one of those, it'd be fine by us, I think. We just want to serve the people who want these things the most. We
And I'm
started
sorry.
off originally talking about 6 pickleball courts, and for whatever reason, I don't remember the reason, we kind of skinnied that down a little bit to 4.
Can you make that smaller?
We could always change it later on too, if we wanted to convert that tennis court to 2 more pickleball courts, we could certainly do that.
That's-
We could do it with the basketball court for that matter as well.
Is there, I mean, do people want a basketball court here?
I don't
I
know.
guess I didn't see anything about basketball.
it was relatively low on the
It was
demand.
in, I think the reason we are even talking about it is because it was in our park master plan to begin with.
That's what I was gonna ask, how does this differ from their park master plan that,
Well,
Do
it differs
have-
because in the park master plan, these things were at an odd angle, and people who play pickleball or tennis want to be faced north-south so that
Okay,
the
makes
sun isn't
sense.
in their eyes.
Where's the splash pad on here? Where?
Further
The
to
splash
north.
pad is further north, it's not shown here on the drawing.
oh, there's space to fit that between them, okay.
The band shell is the hat across.
So- I don't mean this as some sort of goofy devil's advocate thing, but I have a question. Is everybody familiar, how many people are familiar with the issues that are popping up nationally regarding pickleball?
Regarding
There's noise issue is number 1, I think, right?
There are a number of them, and again, it's a very popular, very growing thing. It's outdoor recreation, it's getting people out, it's easier on the knees than tennis is, which is why it's growing within certain demographic group, but it's also growing all the way down to younger people. The two main complaints that are heard are the sound, right? Now, a little bit of that is like, yeah, it's not like tennis is silent, it's not like banging a basketball off an aluminum rim is silent, right? But it is a sound. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, if there's one nearby, go sit down and listen to it. It's a different kind of sound, right? It's a ball that's not too dissimilar from a wiffle ball, a big wiffle ball. It's harder, it's more dense, and then you're hitting it with a paddle. So there's a
So if there's a
thwacking sound.
concert at the band
It's like
shell, you'd
table
want to close.
tennis.
That's what I
Yeah,
was
it's
going
too
to go
close
to.
the band
It's cold.
shell.
So what you do if you were to do this, you might want to make sure that the pickleball is off limits while there are events.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, ma'am. There's another couple things too, but I'll stop for a sec.
The way the park was originally designed, it had some buffers and berms and
Yep,
things to
yep.
help with those noises. That the park engineer that had laid it out, that was given some consideration, and then there were other things to help with those noises and things that were given consideration. There was like shelters, and
Yep.
then the band shell was a little bit more, it was designed a little differently. But I had talked to someone, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was Melissa, but maybe there's a different area that those should go somewhere on land in the Rome Town Center or a different park. Maybe that isn't the ideal spot anymore. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
No, I mean, this is the time to have those
You
kind
know,
of
I'm
discussions.
just
right?
throwing that out there with that noise, cause my husband's picked this sport up now. It's annoying.
Well, so there's a, right,
It's
so let me jump into a couple things.
I'm just gonna say I'm like, go play, you know, then he goes and golfs, and then he goes.
How many
and
votes
says,
did she just lose with
Huh?
that? Just curious.
No, I'm glad they like it, I'm glad they enjoy it, but I can't play because my leg's bad, but it was designed differently, and there was a different plan when the engineers originally laid
Sure.
out the park.
Sure.
But now with the band shell and the children and the little Harmony Park and this area really growing and the density and apartments, maybe it just needs to be reconsidered. That's all I'm throwing out there. With a larger group and a different group of people, and this, because somebody did bring it up at one of the meetings, with living spaces there, and now there's roam away from home and shops and restaurants, and is it a consideration that should now be?
Well, the other
Discuss.
thing, we did talk too about the fact that we aren't gonna put lights in this for at night, so there would be no night playing at all, so that would also help mitigate some of the noise.
True to a degree. So again, the pickleball crowd is very, very passionate. That's the second thing you'll hear. They're
Yes, they are.
very passionate. That's the positive spin on it.
Nice people.
And in many communities, including a couple of my communities, they bring their own lights.
Like minors.
We have not heard of that.
Yep, and they're very inexpensive now, right? They're
Yeah.
little tripod pop up, and you only need about 4 of them because the court is so much smaller.
Oh, now
Unlike
battery
tennis,
power.
it's
Milwaukee.
it's played closer to the ground. So, but the two main issues, and this is not shocking to any of it. If you Google it, these are the two that pop up: the sound and the passion. The reputation, earned or not, is that pickleballers will take over any space where they can put up their portable pickleball setup. Because
Yep.
many pickleball players have the entire setup they need in their car.
They have nets, yeah.
Right. So this isn't again, it's not I played it a couple times, it's not my thing, but I totally understand the fun of it. Back to this though, I was gonna say, it probably doesn't surprise you if I say, when I do a project for a client, I keep an eye on that client when I leave. So I've been following, I saw the park plan when it was done, it was very well done, I loved everything. The berming and the buffering that is talked about, both visual buffers and auditory buffers in the plan, all good. There's not enough space here to do that. But that doesn't mean that means you don't do it. That's a different, really what you wanna do when you're looking at something like this is you have a discussion about the pros and cons and you as a community reach a decision to move forward. When it comes to sound buffering, there are some things that work really, really well, right? I mean, sound doesn't travel like this, right? It travels like that, you know? So anytime you can put up something that messes with the direction the sound wave goes, that's good. Berming is good because one of the advantages, one of the characteristics of pickleball is the game is played closer to the ground than basketball is, for instance. And a combination of berming and vegetation and fencing, there are ways where you can significantly reduce the negatives associated with not just pickleball, but other stuff too. And if you do it the right way, the expense is a little bit high initially, but then it's not an expense that lasts long. You know, if you do it with structure, then you have to repair and maintain the structure. But if you do it with berming, if you do it with vegetation, the right kind of vegetation, mixtures of kinds of plants, done in a way that provides winter city benefit. In other words, deciduous trees to the south, conifers to the north, that kind of stuff. It self-perpetuates. You throw in prairie plants too, and that helps because prairie is so less dense and it just sucks up a lot of the noise. So it's not that things are necessarily compatible or incompatible. The question is whether you can take two things that might not be compatible in this iteration and make them less incompatible.
Just think, you move it to the south side, you build a giant hill, people can sit on the hill and watch the concert.
Go sledding in the winter.
Go sledding in the winter, man, we just killed like 20
The
birds.
other reason for the
Build me a
current
hill.
situation here of these courts is we also want to utilize the restrooms that are
Sure.
available in the band shell.
Yeah, and again, that's,
Look at the.
all user groups want to take advantage of all facilities, and that makes sense. So, again, this is a discussion that it's up to you as a committee to decide how much of this discussion exists within the outdoor recreation plan. It can be surface level, like we would like to, or it can be more detailed. We did a little bit of that in the current plan. That's up to you as a committee. Regardless, if the goal is to increase the availability of any specific outdoor recreation assets, whatever they may be, the question becomes where are the best locations, how soon, where do we find the funding, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I have anything more to say on that, and the way my throat's feeling right now, I'm not sure I have anything more to say on anything.
I have a
Yes,
question
ma'am.
about pickleball. I didn't play, but from the pictures I've seen, it seems very, like there's spectators and there's lots of other people hanging out and kind of gathering. Is there room for that kind of
Yeah,
gathering?
there's a waiting area there in one of the pickleball courts, and you could also have spectators outside there on the sidewalks as well.
The hill can work both ways.
Seems we're trying too much at one place. It's not compatible. If the band shell had,
Well, that's what
in
I'm
my
saying.
opinion, if the band shell hadn't been located where it is, so far to the north, if it had been pushed to the south end and turned 180 degrees, then the whole thing would have made a lot more sense. But where it is now, it doesn't make sense.
Of course, there's gonna be a musical soundtrack, so I won't be able to hear any of the sound. Stop the music.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got
You're really gonna do this to us, aren't you?
But I played on this year.
It's gonna be, again, this isn't gonna give you real, but it's just a different kind of sound. And honestly, if you go by any tennis court where people are playing tennis, it's not just the sound of hitting the ball. You get the people who are grunting. You know, thank you, Monica Seles, and all that. If it's a basketball game, everything makes noise other than cross-country skiing or something. But it is a song that tends to carry.
What was the contribution to society?
Because they thought ping pong should be played on the floor.
Just wait till, hey, have them put up a video of real tennis. I mean, let's get real exciting,
I
you know?
get if you were like teaching people the rules. Right?
Well, so the thing, I mean,
Somebody got crazy at silver sneakers.
the thing about pickleball
Yeah.
is it's much easier on your knees than tennis. You play it on a smaller area, it's much easier on your knees. So
Somebody got
anything
thrown out
that
of
gets
squash.
more people out exercising, particularly as you get older, thumbs up. But every single activity has some downsides, right?
This is
So-
what keep orthopedic surgeons
I was gonna say,
buying real estate.
orthopedic doctors delight.
This is what keeps Dr. Dillman.
Yep. Profit margin, right?
Alright, and,
Just show them that one, other one of the sign,
Oh.
Andrew sign.
No, we didn't do the one, cause it's in black and white.
What is the process for having this pickleball tennis court thing there? Is it like, who decides, yes, no, it's going to be there, it's not going to be there? It's going to be in some other nearby facility that could maybe make it into a more elaborate sport area with these activities, and maybe even like an outdoor gym area? Have more of a sports center, and this be more the music children's area, which is kind of evolved into kind of a children's area now. And take these activities, which are really important, and put them somewhere where they could easily be expanded, which here it really can't be expanded. I don't know, I'm just trying to come up with a better balance for this, rather than to chuck all this stuff in this one spot.
sure, I mean, the wishy-washy answer is you as a community make that decision. But the Parks Committee is gonna be the primary driver, cause that's why they've been, and that's the role that they serve. They were appointed by the town board, that's the role they serve. It'll be up to the committee initially and the community during the reviews of the first draft to determine what facilities are focus areas of the outdoor recreation plan. Which ones are more backburnered, if we have the time, if the money and which ones don't make the cut. That said, whether something is or isn't in the outdoor recreation plan doesn't determine whether it will be or won't be included within the facilities inventory. If there's strong support, again, for a skate park, let's say very strong support, and the supporters are not looking for any money to build it, any money to fund it, they're just looking for a location. That might happen even if it's not a priority of the outdoor recreation plan, right? If the town says, something, we have, I forgot the name of, there was a baseball diamond that was in a state of disrepair.
Mm-hmm.
What's that now?
That's
That's
the kayak launch that we.
Oh, that's
yeah.
right, but there's still an open area there?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that that's the right location, just remember that. So if you have a piece of ground that is underutilized, and there's somebody who's willing to come in and turn it into an RC car park, which is very popular, that would be great. Now, that said, when you create lakefront property, which is what your park is, it's not surprising that lots of people wanna get in on it, right? The RC crowd, pickleball, climbing wall, it doesn't matter, it's like, that's the nexus of recreation. It's the hub of recreation, at least in the core of the community. But yeah, you're gonna have to have these discussions about these honest discussions about compatibility and incompatibility. When it comes to trails and who can use them, when it comes to specific outdoor recreation activities and where they're located. You do not want an RC course anywhere near single-family dwellings, because it's gonna take you about 10 minutes of listening to, and you're gonna have dentist horror nightmares for the rest of your life, cause it's, but so those go someplace else. But if you have a course, an RC course, and you have one of those little red boxes that says, please don't, or please pay $5, something like that. The tragedy of the commons, right? People will use it without paying. but a bunch of people will pay, and it'll be enough to maintain something like that. So there's lots of ways of doing it. It's really up to you though as a community to say, here are our priorities, whatever they may be. Here are the locations that are appropriate for these priorities, whatever they may be. Full speed ahead.
How about we buy some land on the north side of town, that's for, possible solar arrays, make a nice little athletic park.
Don't go there, Will.
Yes,
Jackie,
ma'am.
I think the original intent of the park, with all the multitude of facilities, was so that the kids can play here while the adults are doing this, and it's all in one place. Now, I'm not saying that we have to have it there, maybe there is a better place for pickleball, but we've all heard how popular pickleball is.
Well, I'm not just thinking that, I think we
And-
need to
yeah.
and should have it. I'm
Right.
thinking it should be possibly
Right.
bigger and better. And if you had it in a place with more property, you could actually have pickleball tournaments here. And you could use it more than just local people playing pickleball.
That's a possibility
But-
too. The
and-
other thing
but-
that we were told by the pickleball club was that they are already using facilities in the town. So we had to decide how many to put in the park.
Mhm.
Maybe it won't be used by a big club, but just to have that option in the park, just for more variety, and the basketball court is the same way. Maybe the 40-somethings are playing basketball over here while the kids are playing in the splash pad over there, just to have a variety.
And are the people that are playing pickleball the ones with the children? Is that the older age
Yeah.
group? So then, are those the
Again,
types of
just to
things
jump
that are?
in, pickleball's hugely popular with kids.
No.
Hugely
It's
popular,
what?
hugely popular with kids.
It's encompassing more.
It's not just skewing
It's-
age,
Oh,
It
is
is.
it is.
And I'm not trying to throw shade on your plan, I'm just trying to think it through that maybe there is a place where it would,
Yeah.
Well, the noise
better
thing has
position.
come up.
Yeah,
It
and
has
we-
come up.
Although, again, with the noise, we just put in a band shell, so noise is gonna happen in the park, so.
But it's also where we currently hold all of our concerts and our outdoor movies.
Right,
And our farmer's
right.
market, like, it exists, the noise piece
so
exists.
you're gonna have the farmer's market while people are banging around on pickleball. I mean, it just seems.
Yeah, I don't-
Yeah.
I don't know that those would be incompatible.
I'm
I
just
think
trying to
clearly if
think
you
the
have,
whole thing through.
If you have a string quartet in the band shell, you're gonna wanna make sure there's nothing disrupting that.
Yeah.
That's
And they
easy
do
to do,
have
I mean,
music during the farmer's market.
Who's
Right.
going to stop that? The police are now gonna have to go over there to people and say, sorry, pickleball courts are
well, you put up, I mean,
closed."
first you put up,
Texas?
you
Yeah,
put
we'll
up
just put up
signs.
a sign.
The best people to police pickleballers will be pickleballers. The best people to police RC racing will be RC racers, right? You say, listen, we're doing, put the onus on pickleballers to basically police pickleballers. And then you just put signage up saying pickleball courts will be closed between these hours because we have a acoustic concert in the band shell. So again, it's not about compatibility and incompatibility, it's about whether something is inherently incompatible, or whether something can be made less incompatible. But sure, scary new things, right?
Well, here's the other thing
Put down that
we're talking
iPad, it's
about
gonna
right
rain you.
now.
Stop
is-
watching TV.
Yeah.
These things called radio, stop listening to it, destroys kids. Put those books down, books are bad for, I mean, it's always something, right? So pickleball's very, very, very popular right now, which means it's very, very targeted right now.
We're looking at a landscape plan for the park also, and that is something that maybe that we should emphasize is when we put it out for bid, what can you do in this area to limit sound? Whether it's bushes or a berm or just, put it right out to the professionals, the landscapers that wanna bid on that job. What would you do? How could you do that?
Yep.
So, it's a good time to bring this up.
Now-
And it is advisory to the town board too, so ultimately we have to make that decision there.
The most important thing is the discussion now,
Right.
not trying to fix it,
After it's.
fix problems after. Try to anticipate,
Right.
try to address it now. That was 2 hours and 20 minutes of fun, wasn't it?
I have just a general question.
Yes, ma'am.
Just, do you see anything that we're missing? Like, this
That's
is
a good
really the
question.
up and coming trend. It
Yeah,
just
that's a good
hasn't hit Rome yet. I mean, are we
And ours is
missing a
part-
trend? I wrote that down, that would be perfect at Syracuse.
Yeah, I would
that
like to
would be
think I'm
fun.
smart enough not to answer that question.
Well, like other communities, like, communities are really moving forward with,
Well,
who
so.
knows, croquet is having a big comeback, or whatever it is.
Right. So you're in a fortunate place because what everybody wants are splash pads right now. Everybody wants splash pads, and you have one, right? You will not be sad if you have 2 or 3 or 4. Your budget might not love it, and there are also pop-up splash pads. You
Yeah,
modular
there was
splash
one on
pads.
the news the other night where the fire department just provided a snorkel and water for kids in the park.
Yeah.
Those pop-up ones are kind of interesting. Some of them use something like an elevated cistern, and you just use it for a day. But as I guarantee you, tomorrow, right around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there's going to be a lot of people at the splash pad, right? Those kinds of, again, it's all. If we could put the politics aside on some of these things, it'd be easier to have this discussion. But it's getting warmer, and the warmth affects some communities and some people in communities more than affects others. So we have central air in our house. If need be, we can crank it on and cool down. It's also part of the problem, but then again, when it's 100 degrees like it's supposed to be in Appleton tomorrow, I suspect our air conditioning's gonna be turned on. One of the easiest ways, one of the most effective ways of providing cooling is through things like parks with splash pads and other water features. And they don't have to be expensive. Misters as opposed to misses, no. Misters as opposed to things that mist in parks. They're relatively inexpensive. They have to be cleaned, otherwise the misters can get clogged. But those are something that you have those next to a pickleball court or a basketball court. And it's like a quick 10-second shower, hand operated, so you do this, it comes on for 10 seconds, you walk through it, you cool down, you go back to playing. Well, I mean, there's that kind of stuff. What I typically do in a first draft is throw a lot of stuff on the wall. So there's gonna be more in the first draft than you almost certainly want. But it's easier to look at something and say, no, we don't like that, take it away, than it is to look for something that's not there. So that's why I typically do that. So I'm not intentionally evading your answer, but I just don't wanna, your question, I mean, I just don't wanna answer it because I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that question right now. Give me a couple months give me a month and a half and I'll let you know. But again, it's not, I'll throw stuff in, you'll look at it. One of the things is the ADA stuff and an all abilities park. Those are things that you, don't take this the wrong way, but I think you're morally obligated to focus on. An all abilities park just means exactly what it means. Young, old, more abled, less abled, right? There's a lot of talk about equity and a lot of people talking about something, but they don't actually know what it means. So equality, let's say you have a free bike program, a community bike program. Equality would be everybody has access to this 21-inch frame mountain bike. Well, 21 inches is good when you're 6'4", but not so great when you're 5'4", right? So providing equality in bikes doesn't help. Equity would mean you have tall bikes, somewhat smaller bikes, kids bikes, 3-wheeled bikes, hand-pedaled bikes, right? That's equity, so that, and I'm just using bikes as an example. So when you create a park that is accessible, it means a child in a wheelchair can wheel up to that elevated sandbox and play with kids in the sandbox. It means that that child in a wheelchair can get up to the swing set and roll the wheelchair onto that swing set. So you have to have the pathway to get from wherever their vehicle is to that. That's what equity means. The ADA stuff just means, you know, if bathroom door is this wide and the wheelchair is this wide, you know, it's Newtonian physics. Actually, that's Archimedean physics, right? It's quite simple. So, short answer is, accessibility, and trees and trails and prairie plants.
That was actually cool, our very first summer the splash pad opened, and a dad brought his little boy in a wheelchair. And our previous public works director and I watched him play in it, and that was pretty cool.
So, there are a number of pictures of the Rome Water Park online, right? Many of them. And there's this one that I grabbed because it's like 21st century Norman Rockwell. It just screams happiness and fun and joy. And then my wife, who is a professor of social work at UW Stevens Point, pointed out, you know, Jeff, there are some young ladies in this picture that are dressed for splash pad, but probably haven't approved you using this image on outdoor recreation plans all over the state of Wisconsin.
Oh.
And I was like, yeah, so that one's not going. So I don't use that picture anymore. But the point is, there's lots and lots of images taken at Rome Splash Pad, and they all look happy. Bright sunny days, cloudy overcast days, big smiles, kids, some grown-ups having fun. Nice thing about that is it's a celebrate small win thing too, right? There was this guy, I think it was Tom Peters, back in the 80s, one of those self-help gurus or goofballs, said celebrate small wins. Splash Pad's not a small win, it's a big win, but you have a string of wins that exceed most of the communities I've worked with. And it's cool because you use that to generate more. It's kind of like that critical mass theory, right? Oh, we're not gonna do that. Ooh, we like that. Can we do another one? Oh, we want more. That's what you have an opportunity to do right now. If I don't screw up, too bad.
You never do.
Bob, I'm not sure if the woman's name was here just a little bit ago, but she shared that you guys want.
Jill.
Okay,
Jill.
I'm horrible with names, I apologize. But that you wanted facilities for older and younger to participate in at the same time. You know, my son is autistic. One of our biggest issues with the Rome Town Park is the lack of a fence around it. And then he does suffer from seizures, and so we don't like wood chips. We prefer the squishy stuff that the Rhapsody Park has. So where as much as possible for those things that are geared more towards a younger population, you know, it would be my preference to look to secure those areas with a fence, especially on days when the Rome Town Center is very busy. You know, we frown upon from going there just because, you know, the propensity for him to run out into the street is high, and it's just not a risk that we're willing to take. So, you know, that's my little plug on that one.
The cool thing about ADA accessible parks, and I'll provide some examples, but one of the things that is hugely popular for children with autism are these tactile parks, right? Where it's manipulable and touching and like a maze that you have to walk through. And there's one, and I think somebody mentioned Kenosha earlier.
Me.
Right, so there's one in Kenosha County, I don't remember what, or maybe it was Racine County.
It might be Racine.
Whitefish Bay, I probably will include it in the recommendations here. But that's what it is. It's not that you develop a park for this user group and a park for that. It's that you develop a park or parks that serve multiple user groups. You know, there's all these examples, right? And it's one of those things where you say, oh, of course, but you just have to kind of get a kick in the head to think about it. How do you get through the turnstiles to get on the L in Chicago if you're in a wheelchair? Well, you don't, right? So they had to create this thing off to the side that does this, and then you go through it. And it's because, and forgive me to the other representatives of my gender in this room, it's because our gender built this entire world for our gender, right? And often not just for our gender, but for a certain subtype of our gender. So everything is designed by men, built by men, for men. Modern parks are built for the users of modern parks, which include more than just, you know, English and Norwegian white guys.
Break down barriers, don't build walls.
Right, right. So, and again, whether it be pickleball, all abilities parks, or any of these other things, the more more accessible they are, the more available they are to multiple users, the better.
Thank you.
Mic drop.
Thank you.
Thank you.